Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Thank you for asking, Rory. And Rory and I are so delighted you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's episode 263. 3 interesting topics today, starting off with our theory and practice, where we're going to be focusing on the students and in particular, passing your recorded or observed skills session. So much anxiety comes up around that. So some top tips coming your way and a super duper handout. We're then going to move into practice today, where we look at contemporary issues in counselling. And we're going to be speaking about what it's like to break confidentiality. What happens? You break confidentiality. What happens next? What are the mechanics in today's age of that? And then into practice matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where Rory, you reached out and you held an interview with the head of member services, Camilla Firth, and the head of professional standards and register, Kate Mahoney, from the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, depending on when you're listening to this episode. So it's either the NCS or the NCPS. So there you have it. That's episode 262. That's what you have in, 263. That's what we have in store for you today. And starting off with that theory and practice, Rory, those recorded or an observed skills session, it kind of puts ice into the veins of any student. I remember mine. I was so nervous and trying to remember what I'd learnt and trying to fit all the skills in to make sure I'm ticking all the boxes. Not necessarily the right way to do it, Rory, is it?
No, and yes, I felt the hairs on my neck stiffening as I remembered my recorded skill session. We did ours on a video, I seem to remember, and yes, it was a very challenging experience. Shall we say that? And it seems to be a challenging experience for members of our Facebook group who brought this topic up quite a lot recently. And if you want to join our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We're a closed group, but knock on the door. Our friendly moderator will let you in, and you can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have students, we have qualified colleagues, we also have supervisors and some tutors, and in a rich seam of discussions about all topics of counselling and psychotherapy. But one that seems to have come up quite a bit is recording your skills session. And I think there's so much pressure to record that final submitted portfolio that I've literally seen when I taught students, burst into tears or get very, very stressed out. And I think the secret, if there is a secret to recording this, is practice, Ken.
It is.
And I think that, certainly when we ran training, we taught, we would get people to practice on a regular basis. I know that you were the skills tutor on the diploma that we taught, but I know that you were very keen that people started practicing their skills from the get-go.
Yeah. I think if it's the first time that you're using a recording device, or the first time that you're recording over Zoom, or the first time that you're recording your skills session, then there's going to be that that the element of nerves, that maybe unfamiliarity with the recording, that feeling of being watched or monitored as you're going through that process. And like you say, Rory, practice is what irons that out. So there is an opportunity in if you're doing a formal counselling qualification in the United Kingdom, at a certain level, if you're going to be assessed on your skills, you're going to have in-class time to practice those skills, where you're going to break out maybe with peers or something like that. And what I recommend is you start recording as soon as you possibly can, even if you're using a mobile phone, which is not ideal for recording, but it'll do the job, and popping that down, recording your skills and listening back to your skills, or meeting up with colleagues online, perhaps over an online app such as Zoom. We don't recommend any specific apps, but that's just one that I can mention, and maybe recording the skill session there as well, and then watching that back and evaluating your own skill session, having a look at what you're saying, what's coming out, how the flow is going. And if you're recording it on a regular basis in your practice sessions, chances are when you get to the having to be recorded for assessment or being observed for assessment, you're going to feel a lot less nervous about that, because it's something you've done again and again and again. You're going to know how your recorder works. You're going to know all the technical sides of that, so you wouldn't have to worry about that when that time comes, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think that if you are going to record, I personally wouldn't recommend a mobile phone because of issues of confidentiality.
Yeah.
You don't want to press the wrong button and send the sound file onto Twitter or YouTube or whatever people use, or TikTok, which I believe is very popular. But use a recorder. Usually the organizations have a recorder, and start recording. And what I would say is take the mindset of welcoming feedback, because any set of skills, and I think you can't underestimate this, this isn't one skill. Your skills, it's a skills recording. So you're using a number of skills. They have to be honed. And if you think about, if I think about my first driving lesson, I can remember my driving instructor grabbing the steering wheel and going, no, we're going to have to stop and go through it again, because that's how you learn. You learn by making your own mistakes, and they should be welcomed. Nobody that I've ever met, I've ever taught, maybe with one exception I can think of, could do counselling skills straight off the bat, do a complete session straight off the bat, and it is about, I think, just listening. It can be, I don't know, it can be a bit difficult hearing your own voice, hearing you making mistakes. But that's how you learn. And I think that the more you do it, the more you understand the process of recording, the more you understand what the skill actually asks of you, and what will happen when you apply that skill, the more chance you'll find it's easy to apply that skill when you come to your recorded session. And it comes down to my motto of the more you know, the less you fear. You'll find out the things you need to know by doing lots of recording, getting lots of feedback, and you'll be able to develop, your own particular way of using skills.
Yes. And if you're meeting up and going through this process, recording the skills, doing it online, and I think that there's a benefit in working with some people that you maybe don't know that well as well. So maybe other students, you can, maybe Rory mentioned the Facebook group. You might pop onto the Facebook group. Hey, I'm really looking to do some skills. I'm at level 4. I'm looking for a fellow student to work with. And the reason for that, and even better if you can get into a triad. And the reason for that is you want a person maybe that you don't know observing what you're doing. So if you're in a triad, you've got maybe another student that's also on the same level course of yours, watching what you're doing and feeding back. And it gives you that practice of being observed by another person, so that when it's the tutor observing, you're kind of used to being watched and seen. Now, that's kind of on the nerves kind of things. But if you think about your skills, fitness to practice letter usually comes after the skills have been evaluated. But those skills are like any assignment or exam that you will do. There's going to be a criteria that you need to hit. So it's not just a random use of skills and a random session. Have a look at the criteria. What are you being asked for in your recorded skill session? You're going to have an outline of what the tutor is listening for or looking for if it's on video. And that probably would include, how are you opening that session? How are you starting that session? Are you speaking about confidentiality? Are you speaking about times that you might need to break confidentiality? How long is the session? You may mention that it's being recorded. You may even mention that this is being recorded because it's going to be evaluated by my tutor. You can say it as it is. That's okay. How long will that file be kept for? What will happen to that file when you're finished with that file? So you might say that I will keep the file until my assessment has been done, and then it will be deleted and it won't be kept anymore. Who has access to that file? So you're speaking about basically contracting. You would do verbal contracting. You would mention how long you have within the session. So this is me just going through some of the criteria that you're most likely going to be measured across. You'd then be maybe measured on your rapport building, your minimal encouragers, your active listening. Were you listening? Were you interrupting? And then, of course, the use of skills. It might be silence. It might be reflection. It might be a paraphrase. It might be a summary towards the end of the session. And then you might also be assessed on your ending. How do you end? Do you give an indication that it's coming to an end? Do you ask the client how they are before ending and check if there's a need for a referral? So those are just some of the things to look out for. But best bet is get a criteria, have a look what that is, and when you can, practice your skill sessions with that criteria beside you. So you're practicing it again and again and again. So it's not the first time you're doing it when you're being observed and marked on it.
Yeah, I think there's some really useful observations there, Ken. And I would also say, with my data protection hat on, I've got a data protection hat, so data protection on it, is that if you are going to record anything, you need to be very thoughtful. I would ask your tutor, when Ken and myself recorded and worked with students, it was before the Data Protection Act. I think we finished in 2016 as tutors, and in 2018 the Data Protection Act came along. And I would imagine now that tutors would insist that the information is recorded on college equipment so that they can delete the stuff off themselves. So check that out as well. I think that's really useful. And also, I would say that you need to know how many skills you need to demonstrate within that usual half-hour session. So most criteria, most exam boards have between 3 and 6 skills. So one of the things that as tutors marking skills is that you could have someone starts off really well and then they only use one skill throughout the entire session. And that's fine. They may use it very well, but that would be a refer because they've not used between 3 and 6. On the other hand, you may get someone who's crammed in every single skill at every single opportunity. And the session sounds disjointed because the person's trying too hard. They're leading the session to get the criteria hit. And the person who's in the role of speaker, as we say when we're training, speaker, or it would be the client, is going to be, pushed to one side. So I think it speaks again to pacing yourself, getting that feedback, and working in the triad. And I want to say something about triads. There is a little bit of a secret when you're working in a triad that sometimes isn't always apparent, and it took me a little time to work out. So a triad is 3 students. One student is in the role of the counsellor. One student is in the role of the client, and sometimes that's referred to as listener and speaker. Exam boards sometimes take a dim view of students using the term counsellor and client. So sometimes it's listener and speaker. And then there's an observer. And at the end, so the observer will take notes and give feedback to the person who's in the role of listener, counsellor. Now, when it comes to feedback, what you should always do is get the feedback from the person who's played the client first. Yep. And the reason for that is if you ask for the observer's feedback first, it can influence what the person who's played the client says.
Indeed.
So start with the feedback from the person who is the speaker or the client, and then take the feedback from the observer. And sometimes you may see two very different pieces of feedback. Most of the time, in my experience, the observer will be very, very critical, and the person who's been the role of the client will say, that was great. Yeah. It's really interesting. It can be two very different feedbacks.
Yeah. And that triad work is so super powerful. And it's so super powerful, specifically when you're in the role of the observer. When you're in that role of observer, you get to oversee that whole interaction, speaker and listener. You can write down the skills that are being used. You might say use of silence. You might and you can kind of see the effectiveness of that skill. So silence was used. What happened then? Was it an uncomfortable silence? Did the speaker use that to process and then go deeper into the context of what they're bringing? So you get that, I guess, bird's eye view that you don't always get when you are the listener. When you are the listener, you are in the speaker's frame of reference. You're there with them, and you sometimes the use of the skills is more subconscious of, okay, I used silence over there, and you might be able to hear it by listening back. But as the observer in a triad, really, really powerful. Be the observer as much as you can, because there's lots of learning. You might pick up other people's styles and ways of saying things. How do they top and tail their sessions? Is there anything that you like that you might like to take and play around with within your own sessions? So the other thing to this for me, Rory, is you're talking about passing your recorded skill session. There's two parts to the recorded skill session. Part one is the actual file. So it's going to be a video or an audio file, or you're going to be observed in person by your tutor who might take notes while that is happening. But there's another part of it as well. There's a written part to passing your recorded skill session, where you may be going to refer back to that session and speak about what actually happened and how that relates to your modality. So let's say, for instance, you now referring to the skills, you might say use of silence. You might then say what silence does. So what does silence do? Well, it sometimes gives space so that the client consider what's going on for them. It lets the client set the pace. And then what happened after the use of that silence? Did the client or the speaker in this case go a little bit deeper into the context, into the narrative, into the feelings behind the narrative? Well, that would indicate a successful use of silence. So name the skills that you are using and describe what the skill does, and then how it acted or what it did, what its role was within the actual session that you held. So I guess that's the other side. What I did was I made myself a master skills list. I wrote down all of my skills: silence, paraphrasing, reflection. You know what your skills are. Write them all down, the name of the skill, and then put next to it, from the theory, from when you were learning it, what does that skill do? And it usually does something for the client, and it does something for the counselor as well. So you look from a client's perspective, what does it do? From a counselor's perspective, what does it do? And it gives you the opportunity to kind of evaluate whether that skill worked well within that situation. And you can, within that written part, saying, on reflection, looking back on this, maybe I shouldn't have used a direct reflection there. Maybe a paraphrase would have been a better use of skill, and here's why. So it gives you that opportunity. So there are two parts to passing your recorded skill session.
Yes, and I think Ken's laid that out beautifully. And I guess one final plea, and I think tutors will probably manage this, but be very thoughtful if you are the speaker, or the person in the role of client, what you bring. I think that you need to be. I think that probably tutors would brief that if you're going to use, if you're going to be the speaker, the person who's in the role of client, to bring something that's a bit benign, not deep material, because this isn't counselling. This is counselling skills. And what I've seen when I was a tutor was that it's very, very easy to get out of your depth. As a student, you work with someone, all of a sudden they're telling you about their life story, and you're literally opening someone up. One of the exercises I used to do was something called "What's in your pocket, what's in your bag," and I just get the students to take something out of the pocket. Could be a set of car keys, and the exercise would be just tell the person in the role of counsellor, the listener, what these keys are, and what they mean to you. And you'd be amazed what a rich session you could get out of a set of car keys, or I don't know, whatever's in someone's pocket, some loose change, or a wet wipe, or something like that. You'd be surprised, and it's pretty benign. And I'm sure that tutors, are very, very aware of making sure that what's being discussed isn't going to re-traumatize or put someone in a place where they maybe don't have support. They have a half an hour skill session, they've opened themselves up, and then they don't have any support. So I'm sure that all tutors who listen to this are very aware and manage that very well, Ken.
Yeah, when you're going in as the speaker, think carefully of what you bring. Very, very much so. You don't want to be opening stuff up within yourself. And also, you're working with somebody that is training. You're not there in therapy. It's not there may be, I think, Rory, for me, therapeutic outcome or impact that comes from practicing skills sessions, but it is not therapy. It isn't therapy. It is a practice. And as you say, Rory, bring something that is benign. I like that wording. You drive to the university before where you got angry in traffic because somebody cut in front of you, that kind of stuff. It's okay, it's superficial, it's surface, it's everyday, it's run of the mill, and there's plenty of emotions and materials in just a normal day-to-day interaction. I know I certainly go through a number when I'm journaling. I kind of go back on the day and I see a number of emotions that come up there. I love skills. As Rory said, I headed up the skills tutoring when Rory and I were tutoring together. I'm going to put in here that I have a little personal passion project that I started some time ago. It's called Counselling Skills Academy. And if you're interested in looking at that, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There are some actual skill sessions that you can watch there. But not only that, if you do choose to join Counselling Skills Academy, it is there for practicing counselling skills. It's students from all over, not just the UK, but internationally as well, that work together to evaluate skills together, to work together online, to practice skills in triads. And it's a great place to, hone your skills and become more confident on skills if you feel a little bit shaky on that. But there it is. That is our theory in practice. It brings us to the end of that section, passing your recorded skills session. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by counsellingskillsacademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. And then we move on to practice today, Rory. Contemporary issues in counselling, and what could be more contemporary than breaking confidentiality? If you haven't had to break confidentiality within your practice, then chances are it may come up in the future. And when we need to break confidentiality, there's going to be a reason that underpins why we're breaking that confidentiality. Ideally, it would have been contracted beforehand. But when we get to the actual mechanics of the breaking of the confidentiality, what do we do? And we need to do that thinking now, not at the time when we need to break that confidentiality, Rory.
Yes, and I think there's nothing more that strikes fear in the heart of a therapist than having to break confidentiality.
Yes.
Especially when the client may not be giving you consent. And I can think of the times that I've had to do that. It's been done with a heavy heart, but with clear thinking, clear thinking. Without being too specific, I've, through my 20-year practice, I've had people who had a clear plan to take their own life and were going to enact it when they left the room. I had on one occasion somebody who would have been in clear and present danger had they carried out what they were going to do. That was when there was a child therapist, and that had to be handled with thought. So I think the first position for me is, at some point as a therapist, you're going to have to break confidentiality. I know that this is drilled into you as it was with me as a student. You never break confidentiality unless there's some specific reasons. But I think eventually, if you practice long enough, you're going to have to. And you're going to have a reason to break confidentiality. So the first position is, what does your contract say?
Yeah.
What does your contract say? And usually contracts are things like there's some legal requirements, which is terrorism, which in the UK, you have to break confidentiality if you believe someone is going to carry out a terrorist act. Drug traffic and money laundering, they are statutory requirements to break confidentiality in a lot of industries, such as banking and the law, and some people write those into the contract. I do that because I think that it's possibly sets a boundary for the client. You know, if you're telling the client what the limits of confidentiality are, then you know. And also, some therapists may build into their contract harm to self and harm to others. Mm-hmm. That's certainly my contract. And also, one of the things to consider in the next year or so, I mean, this podcast recorded in April of 23, the next year or so, there's going to be a change in the UK law by all accounts to say that all professionals have to disclose if a child is being harmed, which isn't the case at the moment. For private practitioners, there's lots of contracts within schools, education, healthcare settings, charity organisations that build that in, but it's not a legal requirement. It looks like it's going to be a legal requirement. So the first thing is being very, very clear when you first meet your clients about going through the contract and what breaking confidentiality looks like. And, you know, if you are going to break confidentiality, and I'm sure Ken will pick up on this, there's no better way of thinking about limiting the information you share than using what's called the Caldecott principles, Ken.
It is, yes. And I think we'll put a link to the Caldecott principles into the show notes for today's episode, so you can go and reference those. So to find that, go to counsellingtutor.com. It's click on the podcast tab, go to episode 263, and we'll put a link into those Caldecott principles for you. But the Caldecott principles basically are a set of principles on how to share information with fellow professionals. And what we're looking to do is share only that we need to share. That's the gist of the Caldecott principles. So it's basically, you need to be able to justify the purpose for breaking that confidentiality beforehand. So if that's in your contract, then that's the reason you might be doing that. Only use what is absolutely necessary. Use the minimum that is required, and access should be on a strict need-to-know basis. So you may share that with only one individual if it is appropriate to do so. I think just going back to the contract, Rory, I think it's vital. Well, I guess maybe it's not vital, but it's important for me within my contract of where confidentiality would be broken, who I would break confidentiality to, and within my practice, it was to the client's GP, and it was mentioned in my contract, and also in the intake and assessment of the client. I would be asking them for their GP details and making it clear, saying what the limitations in confidentiality were, and then saying, and if I did need to break confidentiality, it would be to your GP, because you have a professional who can then take that and move that on. And I would certainly be referencing the Caldecott principles in that event. I think also, just going back to the contract again, when speaking about the breaking of confidentialities, where you can, it is good practice to work with the client and in a kind, accepting, non-judgmental way, with a lot of empathy, around the topic where you might need to break confidentiality, and try to encourage the client themselves to pass that information on to their GP or whatever it is, and try and be there to support them through that. There are times when I would not even tell a client that I was going to break confidentiality. It would be in my contract at the beginning, but I'll be honest with you, Rory, if a client was in front of me and they said, well, I've got the bomb in the car now, I'm going to go down to the government building and I'm going to blow it up, I would be saying, well, thank you very much, have a lovely afternoon, and I would be waving goodbye to them, and as soon as they were around the corner, I would be phoning the police. I would not say to them, well, I'm afraid I have to break confidentiality, because I might be putting myself or my family in danger by doing that. So if you perceive that you may be in danger by breaking confidentiality, then we wouldn't tell the client, but it would be covered in our contract beforehand of why we were. Otherwise, I would be working with that client and try to encourage them to actually give that information over themselves. I think another area of this, Rory, is, you mentioned harm to self, harm to others. That was in my contract. Right from my placement counselling days, harm to self, harm to others was right there in my contract. We need to understand what that means. Does that mean that if a person comes in and they've been self-harming, that we would need to break confidentiality? And these are questions for you and your practice, because that is, I guess, harm to self. But at the same time, there is the position of, this is secretive, this is a way of coping. Would it benefit that client with putting that information out? And I think this is where it becomes a tricky area to kind of work out when one should break confidentiality. Well, I don't know what your views are on that one, Rory.
It's a very tricky one. I'll answer that, Ken. I just want to pick up another point about acts of terrorism.
Yeah.
The law was framed. I don't think anybody expects someone to come into their practice and say, I'm going to do a terrorist attack on a government building. The law was actually framed during the difficult period in Northern Ireland, where there was a lot of sectarian attacks and lots of attacks, and what it was framed for those who were counselling relatives of people who were interned, and you can look up what internment was. You can Google that, or maybe in prison, and it might be information was shared during those sessions that would indicate that there was that there may be a bomb or some terrorist activity. So just to put people's mind at rest, I don't think you're going to get anybody who's going to come in who says they're going to do that seriously. I wouldn't imagine you get a serious person doing that. You could do in these times, but that's why it was framed for. But yes, to come back to your other point, Ken, I think it really is important that you decide what serious harm to self is. So, as a child therapist, I would have had clients who may have cut themselves, cut themselves. I wouldn't usually have broken confidentiality for that. I would have been very curious to know if they were using safety, how they were using safety, were they using clean implements, what did that look like? And depending on the method, then I would take a view. Now, I'm sure that a lot of child counsellors now work in schools have a very specific policy. I didn't at that time, but I'm sure there'd be a very specific policy that if there's any self-harm mentioned, you'd have to disclose it. But if it was someone in general practice, if they were using cutting, I would try and help them with other ways of safe self-harming, and this comes down to CPD. Really does come down to CPD. But if someone came and said, I'm taking poisons, I wouldn't even think twice. Yeah. Because, poisoning is a form of self-harm, believe it or not. And that can be very instantaneous. There can be no coming back from that. So I think it's talking to the clients and saying, look, I am concerned that you're doing this, and also keeping in the back of your mind, why are they telling you? I've had on a number of occasions, certainly when I work with young people, them telling me, and I thought they want me to do the telling to the people you know. And I've just said, what do you want me to do here?
Yes.
You've told me, what would you like me to do as your therapist? And sometimes they've just said, could you come with me and see Miss or Mr.? And I've said, yes, no problem. Let's do that. Let's do that now. And we would find the person. And interestingly enough, in those cases, I would walk in and the person who was head of safeguarding would look at me, and I would look at the client, and I'd sit down and I'd look at the client. The client would tell what was going on, and I wouldn't say a word. And then I would get up and leave. And technically, I hadn't broken confidentiality. I just really supported the client in sharing that information. Yeah. So I'd write that up in my notes, speak with my supervisor, and off we go. And I also think we should just touch on briefly, Ken, what's the aftermath of breaking confidentiality? How does one repair the therapeutic relationship? Because if you have to break confidentiality, you've broken a covenant of therapy, like almost like a holy sacrament of therapy, which is, thou shalt not break confidentiality. And I think sometimes you've just got to be honest with the client and say, I was concerned that, what happened may have ramifications, and try and rebuild a therapeutic relationship. When I broke confidentiality, I'm glad to say that only on one occasion did the person really, really not want to work with me again. The rest of the clients were actually a bit grateful that they had that permission to do that, if you like.
I like the example that you used, Rory. I think that is a great example of best practice around supporting the client to break the confidentiality themselves, that kind of being there and being so supportive. And you were speaking about when you're working with younger people, and this comes down, you've got your contract, but you've also got the policies, the procedures of the agency or the group that you're working with that you need to bring into that contracting as well. If there's any area where you feel you need that confidentiality has to be broken according to the policies and procedures of the organization that you're working with, that needs to be mentioned in that first session. So I'm thinking now, for example, you might be working in drug and alcohol rehabilitation or key working or aftercare. Well, very often within those organizations, if the person uses or alcohol or drugs, there is a requirement that you need to break confidentiality and tell the center. It can be dangerous if somebody is on a prescription for opioids, maybe methadone or equivalent, and then they use, it can be dangerous to that person. So we need to break confidentiality. But if I was working with that client group, as I have, it would be made clear in the contracting, if you come in and you share with me that you've been drinking or using drugs, I do have to let the center know or the organization know. I wonder how you feel about that. Do you understand that? Get the feedback and get their standpoint on that. Again, Rory, one of the things you said in there that is so vitally important, and it kind of just passed by, but this is a massive focus. I'm going to take a big light and shine it on here. Your notes. If you're breaking confidentiality, if you've had a conversation where you've had a chat with a client and you've encouraged them themselves to maybe present to their GP to tell them something, put it in your notes. So important. Put it down, write it down. Why, how, where, when, what was the reason? Place that in there. I want to go back to those Caldecott principles just to kind of put a full stop after this one. Number 7 of the Caldecott principles says the duty to share information can be as important as the duty to protect a client's confidentiality. Yes. And it is an area where we need to tread carefully. But when we're speaking about harm to self, harm to others, the legislations to which we work, the damage of not sharing can be significantly higher than the damage of sharing. The damage of sharing, breaking that confidentiality could be, well, you can kind of work that out. The client might not be happy. There may be some ramifications there, but we need to look at what could the ramifications be of not sharing that information.
Oh, absolutely. And that is why, of course, the Caldecott principles were written, because of Victoria Climbié, a child who died at the hands of their relatives, I seem to remember. and all the organisations had all the information they needed to see this child was in danger, but they were fearful of sharing that information because of confidentiality. And we don't want to be working in a place of fear as therapists when it comes to the best practice and supporting our clients and the general public. Confidentiality can be about protecting the general public. We don't want to be working with a place of fear. The more you know, the less you fear. So have a look at those Caldecott principles. Go to episode 263 and make yourself, if you don't already know what they are, have a look at them. Talk about it with your supervisor. Speak about your colleagues. If you haven't had to break confidentiality, I think that's a great topic to take to supervision.
Oh, yes.
That works.
Simulated confidentiality break.
Yeah.
Simulated. Go through it before it's real, before it really happens. In the same way as we practice our skills before we will practice with a real client, practice confidentiality, where a situation where you have to breach that confidentiality. How is it done? So if I was working with you, Rory, I'd say, wow, that you've just said, Rory, it just takes me right back to our contract where we spoke about and as per the contract, as I mentioned then, I need to break confidentiality. I need to tell somebody about this. I wonder how we could do this together. What do you feel about that? And, oh, wow, what a topic. What a topic. And it's a topic you don't want to be caught unawares. You want to think about this before you reach it.
Absolutely. And I'll go back to my mantra, the more you know, the less you fear.
With that, we move out of practice matters and we go out of practice today into practice matters. And today, in our CPD section, Rory, you reached out in our series of kind of pulling back the curtain and showing a professional body, the inner workings, what actually happens. You reached out to Head of Member Services, Camilla Hyland, and Head of Professional Standards, Kate Mahoney, from the National Counselling Society.
Absolutely, and we talked about membership benefits. What's the benefit of being a member of a professional body? And we asked both of them, and this is what they had to say.
Practice matters.
And continuing our series of interviewing colleagues from the National Counselling Society and pulling the curtain back to a professional body, seeing what goes on inside of a professional body, I'm delighted to welcome Head of Membership Services, Camilla Hyland, and Head of Training Services and Professional Standards, we've heard from her before, Kate Mahoney. So welcome.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks so much for having us this morning.
Hi, Rory. It's lovely to be here.
And we're going to be talking about membership of the NCS, or how one gets membership of the NCS. So I guess the first question is, what qualifications would someone need to apply or to go on to the National Counselling Society accredited register?
I think I can answer that one, Kate.
Yeah.
So in order to get onto the NCS's AR, you need a minimum level 4 Ofqual qualification, Ofqual or equivalent. This needs to be in core one-to-one counselling or psychotherapy. It needs to have a placement integral to the course of at least 100 hours. It must be full-time over a year or across 2 years, part-time minimum. And it really must be taught in the room. So with a tutor, distance online doesn't count, I'm afraid.
Yes, and I know we've had a lot of disappointed people, certainly in our Facebook group, who've done online courses where it's just basically they've worked through a workbook, or they've answered a lot of multiple choice questions, and or they've submitted assignments online. They've had no face-to-face tuition as such, and they've had no kind of group interaction. And sadly, they've come to the end of their qualification, gained it, and of course, it's not suitable for joining a professional body. So I guess that brings me to my next question. Face-to-face training is important. So why is it important to attend a course that is not purely online or achieved via distance learning?
I'll take that one, actually, if that's all right, because I get asked that question quite a lot within the role of sort of standards and training services and all that sort of thing. So it's something that I'm used to, answering. basically, in-person training for counselling is so important because what it gives trainees is their interpersonal communication skills stuff, so that they're in the room developing that, and it's really important when you're building a really strong therapeutic relationship with clients to have those skills really well honed. The active listening, empathy, the ability to create a safe and supportive environment for your clients so that they can open up and explore their concerns. That's really key to that successful counselling space. And therefore being able to learn those skills and practice those skills in an environment that is in the room enables the experience to be more immersive, engaging, and therefore allowing learners to develop a really deep and nuanced understanding of their subject matter. Also, when you're doing your in-person training, you've got the benefit of having those experienced trainers, your tutors, on hand to give you really good support and feedback as you work on these skills. So it feels, and it is a lot easier to develop your clinical judgments and respond to the non-verbal cues and emotional states that you find when you're doing your experiential work specifically as part of your training. To be in the room doing that and having your tutors there to sort of help you and help guide you. It can be done online, but it is a lot more difficult and challenging to experience that type of thing when you're in a learning environment. And it's also a lot more difficult for your tutors and your peers to observe you in an online environment. So that's why we sort of say that, in the room, face-to-face training is really, really key. The other advantage, there's quite a lot of advantages of this in the room stuff, which is obviously a really historical space that we've always had, and things have moved a little recently because of the COVID, but we still really put a lot of emphasis of that, with your tutors face to face, is that you can work on your self-awareness and your self-reflection skills, which again, really essential for being an effective counsellor. And being able to reflect on your thoughts and feelings and behaviours in a context of being in the room with your peers around you, with your tutors around you during your training is a really powerful space to be. So really, all in all, that in-person training, in the room training is a really, really good way, really rich way to develop and refine your interpersonal communication skills. You're, developing your clinical judgment and your self-awareness. All of that stuff that's really important when you are learning your counselling trade, as it were. And just before I sort of finish off on that question, because I know it's quite a lot there to take in, but when we look at in-the-room work with regards to placement as well, so, you've got in-the-room training stuff, in-the-room placement work, the reason why we still sort of really value that in-the-room placement experience is, again, as a student, you're gaining really significant real world experience. It helps you build rapport and have a greater sense of presence with your clients, with your, and as you would with your peers in your training space. And again, in the room stuff can enhance confidentiality because you're more in control of your physical environment. You can ensure that people aren't being overheard, which can increase that sense of safety and privacy for you and your client. And not to sort of forget as well that importance of professional networking. So, if you're in an organisation doing your placement, which is what, we look to for your qualifications, you get to meet and network with other professionals in your field, including your supervisors, other colleagues, other trainees, and other people involved in that type of work, which is a really, it's a really rich source of development while you're learning. So I would say that's in a nutshell, but it's quite a big nutshell.
Well, there you have it. And yes, well, I think that's a very, very comprehensive answer. So for those who wish to apply to become NCS members, or NCS, or soon to be NCPS, National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society, because there is a name change in the offing, I believe. How long does it take for your application to be processed?
So it depends. So everyone, there are different paths to joining the NCS, and obviously it depends on the NCPS. You need to get used to that. But it depends on whether you're applying to go on the register or not. Everyone can apply via the website. It's a very, very simple process. You set up a direct debit, and once that's cleared, you can then select what type of membership you want to apply for. If you're applying for a student membership, for example, that's quite a quick process, because we just need to check that you're on an appropriate course. If you're applying as a newly qualified counsellor, that might take a little bit longer. So we normally advise about 6 weeks. Now, that's because anyone going on the register does need to be individually assessed by our assessment team, in terms of public protection. So that will take a little bit longer. If you are currently a member of another membership body with a talking therapy AR, again, that process will probably be quicker because you've already been vetted. But I'd probably say anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, again, that's a very, very comprehensive answer. And I can say that as someone who has recently joined the NCS, or soon to be the NCPS, I was already on the accredited register, and it was really easy to change over. I went through the process like everybody else, and I was asked for some information, and it was a very straightforward process if you're already a member of a body that's under the accredited register. So I thought I'd just pop that in. And I guess that leads me to the next question. What are the benefits of membership? What are the benefits of joining a professional body, or in the NCPS in this case?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people come to us just think, because they have to. Well, obviously the most obvious is to be on that accredited register. It's all about public protection. For a practicing counsellor, potential clients or potential employers can see that you're safe, ethical, you've been vetted, etc. But the NCPS offers a number of other ones, some really good stuff, actually. We have exclusive CPD. So these are live events that are member only, run normally over the weekend over Zoom, a limited amount of participants, so say 10 people, and run by experts. This is only available to NCPS members, and we get some fabulous feedback on that. There's also a lot of CPD online as well. There's a free CPD library as well that you can do it, in your own time. There's professional support, which I think is really, really important. So we get a lot of our members will come through with ethical queries, which will come through to my team, but we also have a team of experts that we can consult. I think that's a real benefit. If you and your supervisor have got stuck on something, we're here to advise. What else? Reduced fees for students for supervision, and all their personal counselling as well. We have a fantastic regular magazine, which has got some great content. Again, we've got some really good feedback on that recently. Loads of resources online, guides to setting up private practice, good practice guides, that kind of thing. One of my favourites is you can apply for a totem card, which used to be known as the NUS card. So this isn't just students. Anyone, and I think a lot of people don't realise this, anyone who is a member of the NCPS can apply for a totem card, and you get loads of amazing discounts and benefits. I personally love the 10% off co-op, yeah. And our most recent one, which I don't know if it's even been announced, is you can now, if you're an NCPS member, you can apply for an enhanced DBS, which is fantastic because that's something our members have been asking about for a long time. Yeah. That's probably not everything, but they're the highlights, I think, Rory.
Oh, that sounds exciting, and I kind of missed that. What do you get excited at getting 10% off?
This is the totem card.
Yes.
10% off co-op.
Oh, the co-op. Oh, right.
Shopping, bottles of wine.
Right. We're based down in Sussex, so we have a plethora of co-ops. So I was very excited by that then.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. And if anybody from the co-op's listening, we're available for sponsorship. Yeah, well, there you have it. I mean, I think that is a really great benefit in tough times. when when there is a cost of living crisis at the time of recording this. Every little helps, to quote another supermarket. So
other supermarkets accepted.
Other supermarkets accepted, indeed. So I guess one of the questions that I asked myself, because I qualified, nearly 20 years ago.
Never. You don't look that old, Rory.
Oh, well, there you have it. I get someone's gained the qualifications maybe 20 odd years ago, or they've gained their qualifications from a different country, overseas, as we sometimes say. Would they still be able to apply for membership?
Yes, is the answer. Yes, you can apply for membership if you've qualified a long time ago, or your qualifications are sort of from a different location. And as Camilla said earlier, we look at every application on a case-by-case basis. We've got a standard procedure for application that Camilla highlighted earlier, but we've also got what we call a complex process. So that's for applications that aren't sort of, straight in, straight down the line, that we know of training courses and things like that we already maybe accredit, or that we've already had experience of dealing with from previous applicants in the past. So what we all often ask is, especially if it's overseas that you've trained, and overseas, we'll ask for evidence of how that qualification maps onto the UK qualification framework. So there's a process that you can go through to get that verified for you. And then once we have that bit of information, we then, I was going to say the word interrogate. That sounds a little bit harsh, doesn't it? We'll then really, really assess the content of the course that you have completed, the qualification you've completed overseas, if this is an overseas application, to make sure that it matches the criteria, supports the criteria that we have for our accredited AR. And if there are elements of that training that aren't so apparent, we liaise with the applicant, very carefully, very openly about what we need to see, and information that we might need in addition into the course content, to just make sure that that the person going on the accredited register is safe and competent to work with clients. With regards to qualifications done many years ago, similar sort of process. Things have changed, criteria has changed, the world has changed, legal requirements, safeguarding, things are a little more specific sometimes these days, and depending on where you've trained and when you've trained. But again, we'll do it case by case basis. And it may be that we'll ask for statements, reflective pieces, to just understand how you've been using your qualification, what you've been doing since you qualified. It may involve getting supervisors' reports and verifications for you, just so we can understand how you've been working since you've qualified, to make sure that now applying and making sure that you meet criteria, you have those competencies and are able to work safely and ethically. So my quick answer was yes. The long answer was the rest of it. So yeah, doors are open.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good thing, because we do have lots of people now who may be visiting or living or qualified in different countries, and it feels important that they're able to join the accredited register to be able to work and support people. So that sounds like a very thorough process and a very even-handed process. I guess, which brings me on to my last and final question. The NCS, soon to be the NCPS, I'll be glad when you've changed your name. I was not thinking going past it. But you have different types of registrants. So if someone wants to apply for a different form of registrant, how do they go about that?
So again, it depends. If they already are, at an equivalent grade in another membership body, then that's very straightforward. They can apply based on them already having been awarded that grade. But if they are currently an accredited registrant and would like to become an accredited professional, firstly, what I'd say to everyone, because we're getting a lot of inquiries about this at the moment, you have to wait 3 years. You have to have been in practice for 3 years, and that's basically non-negotiable. That can count. The 3 years does count from your first placement, but you have to be practicing for 3 years. We have a number of other criteria. One, I guess, of the most important is 450 tutor-led hours. So quite a lot of qualifications that will get you onto the AR as accredited registrant will be perhaps a minimum of 300. So if you are applying for accredited professionals, it's really important that you check those tutor-led hours. And when we say tutor-led hours, it's what Kate referred to earlier, actually being in the room with the tutor. It's not the total course content. So there are a number of other things, but we're pretty proud at the NCPS that we don't charge anything additional to go to that next level. And we also support throughout the process. So it's not a case of you've submitted everything, the assessment team will say no. It can be a dialogue. So apart from that, though, we also now have our specialist registers, which we're really, really proud of, especially the CYPT one that launched last year. Again, you need to be on the AR, so at accredited registrant level, it's fine, and you need to be on the AR, and then there'll be certain criteria. So it'll either be that you've done a particular course that meets our criteria, like a level 5, or you can come via the portfolio route. So if you've got a lot of experience working with young people, and we're looking at that both ways. And as Kate says, we do look at every application individually and try and be supportive as we can. And then our other specialist register is the RTR, Relationship Therapist Register. Again, it's similar to the CYPT, so you've got those two different routes in. You need to be on the AR initially, and then you're very welcome, to apply.
And just, as we were saying earlier about the overseas stuff or the register qualifying quite a few years ago, when you are submitting an application for a different type of registrant membership, again, Camilla's just said we do it on a case-by-case basis, but we potentially will be asking for reflective pieces of work. How are you working with the qualifications that you've gained? How's your experience embedded over the time that you've been offering the services that you're offering, whether it be for children, young people, or relationship therapy? And again, we involve sort of supervisors to give us reports to say, just to sort of support you and support us to say that, you're competent and fit to work in those particular specialist areas of counselling provision. We are.
Well, there we have it. And if you're interested in any of the things that have been discussed in this section of the podcast, if you go to our website, counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 263. We will put some links in the show notes where you can go and visit the website or go and find specific areas of interest that have been discussed. So it only remains for me to say thank you very much to Camilla Hyland, who's the Head of Professional Services, and to you, Kate Mahoney, Head of Training Services and Professional Standards, for joining us today.
Big thank you to Camilla and, of course, to Kate and to you, Rory, for hosting and holding those important discussions. This has been episode 263 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
And we started with theory and practice, where we talked about passing your recorded skills session, gave you some observations and reflected on how practice makes passing, as we say.
I like it.
And then we went on to practice today, the thorny issue of breaking confidentiality. No one wants to have to do it, but the fact is that probably in a practice life, we will have to. What do you do and how do you prepare for it? And then finally, in Practice Matters, caught up with Camilla and Kate from the National Counselling Society, and they talked about membership benefits. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com. gmail.com.